Good morning again. A couple things that I forgot to say. First, I've forgotten all your names already, so be patient with me. The second is related to that. As I said, I'm here to learn, and when I'm learning, when anyone's learning, they're going to mess up. So I hope you're willing to mess up with me as I go through the service and as I'm part of your worship leadership at Crossroads. So be patient with me, and thanks for your grace. So first of all, it's my first day preaching here. My second day. I preached last night. But I want to put you to work too. So the first thing I'd like you to do today is think of something that you have lost and then found again. Something important to you. Think of something that you lost at some point but then came back to you, and think about how you felt when you found that thing again. All right? So think about that for a few seconds, and then share with somebody near you about that thing and how you felt when you got that thing back. Go ahead. You think of something? So that thing you lost, it was glasses, something else. You lost it, you found it, and it's such a relief, right? I've got a story to share with you. A few years ago, I needed new sneakers. Or where I grew up in Minnesota, we called them tennis shoes. Did you know that sneakers is kind of an East Coast thing? It's very strange. But sneakers, I needed new sneakers. And so my family and I, we went to Kohl's, like you do, to get new shoes. So we walked around and we looked at some clothes for a while that I also needed, and then went to the shoe department. At that time, I'm married. Some of you met my wife last week, or some of you know her, Kristen. And I have two kids, Anna, who's 7 now. She was 4 at the time of this story. And I have a son, Weston, who's 4 now, and he was 1.5 at the time of this story. So at Kohl's, they have those weird little carts. They have like a bag in them, and then you can sit your kid in the front. It's kind of a different style. It looks kind of like a stroller with a bag on the back. So we had him strapped into that, right? Because we didn't want him to run all over the place. But we got to the shoe department, and if you've been to Kohl's or any department store, right, the shoe shelves are like this high, so you can see over them, but there's little aisles in between them, right? So Weston, being 1.5 and having just learned to walk 6 months earlier, was very anxious to get out of that stroller bag thing. So he started whining like kids do. So we let him out. And when we got him out, I started to play with him a little, right? I chased him around the little shelves and said, well, look out. He would giggle and run around, and we were having a good time. So then Kristen said, I'm going to go look at the women's shoes over here. And I said, okay, I'm looking at sneakers over here. I'll try some on and get ready to go, because our kids were ready to go. Kids are always ready to go before the parents. I don't know if you're aware of that. But so she went over there. I was over here. I tried on some shoes. I tried on the Nikes I still have. And I stood up to take my shoes back to Kristen, and she said, "Is Wes with you?" And I said, "I thought he was with you." And so we looked around the shelves, right, in the shoe store, thinking he was playing the game again. He was playing a little hide and seek. "Weston, are you here? Where are you?" He wasn't in the shoe department. And so panic, as you might imagine, started to set in. Kristen and I shared our fears, right? The worst possible things start running through your mind at this point. So we looked further out into the men's department, into the bedding department. "Weston, are you here?" We started to get very scared. And I don't know how long we were looking. It could have been 5 minutes, 10 minutes. It felt like 2 hours that we couldn't find our son. And as we were looking, down the aisle came a woman, older woman, holding my 1.5-year-old son, smiling, saying, "Oh, are you looking for this?" We said, "Yes, yes, we are in fact looking for this. Thank you. Thank you so much." He had wandered off to the greeting card aisle, which was halfway across the store, saying, "Daddy, Daddy, looking for me." And this woman said, "Well, I'm not your daddy, but clearly you're looking for someone." So she started wandering around. It wasn't until we got back to the car and sat down, started to drive away, that the adrenaline that had built up started to come down. And I was able to go from panic and fear and fight or flight to calm, peace, and contentment that my family was together again, even though we were separated for such a short time. Now, I don't know the mind of God, but I have a suspicion that what Jesus was talking about in the gospel today was part of what may have been the kind of feelings that I felt. When the lost sheep is found, God rejoices. Jesus says heaven rejoices over the one sinner who comes back, more than all of the 99 others who were always part of the kingdom. Another part of my story, if you had told me 5 years ago that I'd be here today interning at this church while attending the seminary at Philadelphia, I would have just shook my head and said, nope, that wasn't me. Although I was raised in the ELCA, and I went to church every Sunday growing up in a small town in Minnesota, I sang in the choir, I performed in Christmas pageants, I went to a Lutheran college after high school, Wartburg College in Iowa. Despite all that, I had convinced myself that I wasn't so sure about this God thing, that I was not a part of this group of people who worship God. And although I had turned away from God, God had not turned away from me. And through the voices of friends and colleagues over the past few years, I believe that God has pointed me in this direction to bring me here today. And God, I believe, rejoices for the turn that I made. For God's grace is truly amazing and freely given to all. And perhaps many of you have your own stories of turning away from one path that led you here today. I'm sure many of you have felt the great grace of God wrap you like a warm hug, or caress your cheek like a warm breeze in the fall when you least expect it. Some of you have been down a path leading you away from God for one reason, or for many reasons, and have been turned back in love. Perhaps some of you are still waiting to feel that turn in your heart and that calm that comes when you know that God is so relieved that you have been found. You may still be waiting to know, like a light bulb in your head, that love and grace has been attainable all the time. So this is the first message that we take from Jesus' gospel today. That God has a grace that is truly amazing. And like when my son was found and I was relieved beyond belief, so too does God feel content and happiness when we turn from our lost ways, from our sin, from our separation from God, and live into God's grace and love for us. But the gospel today makes me think of another story. And it goes like this. There once was a man who used to go to the ocean to do his writing. He was a writer. He had a habit of walking on the beach every morning before he began his work. And early one of these mornings, he was walking along the shore after a big storm had passed and found the vast beach littered with starfish as far as the eye could see, stretching in both directions. Off in the distance, the writer noticed an old man approaching. And as the old man walked, he paused every so often. And as the writer grew closer, the writer could see that he was occasionally bending down to pick up an object and throw it into the sea. The old man came closer still, and the writer called out, "Good morning. May I ask what you're doing?" The old man paused, looked up, and said, I'm throwing starfish into the ocean. The tide has washed them up onto the beach and they can't return to the sea by themselves. When the sun gets high, they will die unless I throw them back into the water." The writer replied, "But there must be tens of thousands of starfish on this beach. I'm afraid you won't really be able to make that much of a difference." And the older man bent down, picked up yet another starfish, and threw it as far as he could into the ocean. Then he turned, he smiled, and he said, "It made a difference to that one." Friends, the world is large and overwhelming. There are problems that we cannot solve on our own. But we have the power to make a difference. The Syrian civil war has been raging for 5.5 years. It is out of control and seems hopeless. There is not an easy solution. Why should we help? What can we do? Rescue workers and hospital staff made a difference to this one. The floodwaters that rose recently in Louisiana. Thousands lost everything they had. What could we do? Well, Lutheran Disaster Response and hundreds of other volunteers and workers said, "We can make a difference to at least one family." And they responded. Friends, today is God's Work, Our Hands Day in the ELCA. Some of you are modeling the t-shirts. You're all welcome to grab a t-shirt today to remember that this is God's work in our hands. Today, all across the country, Lutherans will be going out into the community to do God's work with their own hands. We cannot end poverty today in our country. We cannot make the entire environment clean today, but we can make a difference to the kids who play in Shoshone Park, which includes my kids. We can get the chance to help welcome college students to our neighborhood by packing them some snacks and saying, "You are cared for, you are loved, you are welcome in this community." We can make a difference to one another. And why, friends, do we feel so bold as to think that we can make a difference in the world? How do we have the audacity to believe that we could make differences in the lives of others? Well, for Christians, for those of us who have known God's incredible grace, for those of us who thought we were lost to sin and not being good enough, but have been found by love, for those of us who have had our hearts of stone, our hearts of indifference, our hearts of hate changed into hearts that know love, it is the only reasonable response. We love because God first loved us. As Paul says in his first letter to Timothy, "I received the mercy of Jesus, and now I am an example of that mercy to others, so that they may know Jesus as well." Many of you know Paul was first Saul, and he was a Jewish man who persecuted Christians. He encountered Jesus on the road, and his heart was changed. He was one of the first to know God's incredible grace. And he wrote so that others may know the love of God. We who know what it is to have been lost and then found are now sent to find others so that they might know grace. But remember, we are not called to find every single person ourselves, for this is not possible. The way change happens, the way love happens, the way God's work happens is through making relationships, shaking hands, cleaning parks, feeding others, giving shoulders to cry on, one person at a time. May we each make a difference to one another. Amen.